In this video, I want to talk about the numbering process and the numbering of parts and assemblies in Comosys. So let me first start by giving you a basic idea about what numbering is. Obviously, a lot of you will know that, but just in case people are just getting into the steel business and they want to learn the various concepts involved, I just want to spend a few minutes on what numbering is. So the idea is that everything you see on the screen, this entire building, is going to be manufactured. So every piece you see, so is this plate over here, this part over here, this beam over here, this plate over here, each and every piece on the screen will need to be manufactured. And for that to happen, we need to produce drawings. And on these drawings, every piece needs to get a number. Now, there are two types of numbers. One, what we call part numbers, and one, what we call assembly numbers. Now, part numbers are easier to understand. What they are is basically that every part you see, so anything you can select, any beam, any plate. So the first thing is that it's only beams, and you don't number bolts, for example. You number your plates, you number your beams and columns and the frames, basically. Or if it's concrete, then you're numbering your slabs and walls and those elements as well. But the point is that every part is numbered. So every part, if I were to double click on this plate, for example, if I were to go in there and double click on this plate, and I went to my general definitions, it will, or this detailing definitions, you will see that it has a part number. So every element has a part and an assembly number, and it has a part series and an assembly series, and a series starting number and an actual number. This is the number we are interested in. So this plate over here is actually called P 2031, and this will be drawn on a separate A4 sheet maybe, and that A4 sheet will be sent to the manufacturers, and maybe there are 20 more of these. So they will know that there are 20 parts marked as P 2031, and they will cut them out and they will put them aside for whatever use they have for it. So that was easy. It's easy to understand what a part mark is, because we can basically think of a plate or a profile and just imagine that every one of those pieces has a part mark. But what is an assembly? If you notice over here, if I were to double click on this beam, for example, this beam has a part mark of P1701, but it also has an assembly part of KR368. So what is an assembly number? An assembly is basically lots of parts connected to each other. That's all an assembly is. So if I wanted to find out what the assembly of this beam was, I would just select the beam, right click and say select the assembly, and it would select all the parts which are connected to this beam somehow, usually by welding. And if I were to say show only the selected, then you would see on the screen that this is the assembly. All these parts are welded to this beam, and this is how they will send this beam to the site. And at the site, it will be bolted to the rest of the structure. But if you were to be on the truck on which this was loaded, this is what you would see. This whole thing would be welded to each other, and this whole thing would have a name, and that name would be KR368. So KR368 is not the name of this plate or even this beam alone. KR368 is the name of this entire assembly. That is in steel structures, basically every part has a part mark, like we talked about. So if they were going to manufacture only this beam, not the parts welded to it, then they would be manufacturing the part P1701. If they were to manufacture only this plate at the shop, they would be manufacturing P493. Or similarly, if they were to cut out this part, they would be manufacturing P1702. But when they would be manufacturing the beam KR368, then they would put all these parts together and they will have a drawing, and the dimensions will be given on that. And that will be called the assembly drawing of this beam. And that drawing will be used to then create this assembly. Now, the reason I went through all that is to basically explain the meaning of these two numbers. Every part in Comosys will have a part mark, an actual part mark, and an actual assembly number. Now, in this case, if I were to double click on this plate, it is part of that assembly. But if you notice, the assembly number is 0. What that is telling us that this is not the main part of this assembly. This plate belongs to an assembly, which is what assembly is that? We just saw that it was KR368. So the main part, every assembly will have one main part. That will be the part which will be representative of the entire assembly. And we can talk about the details of that later. But basically, every part will definitely have a part mark. That's for sure. You won't find this number to be 0 anywhere. But wherever you find this number to be 0, all that's telling you is that this part is actually part of a bigger assembly, and it's not the main part of that assembly. So these are the basic concepts behind your part numbers and your assembly numbers. Now, if I were to show everything once again and talk about the numbering process now, the numbering process is a process which looks at the entire model and compares every part with every other part, compares every assembly with every other assembly, and numbers everything. It comes up with a number. So it will know that, for example, if this particular plate is called P493, and I'm hoping this one is the same as well, but let's double click on that. So yeah, this one is also P493 because it's the same beam connecting with the same connection. So it compares every single part in the entire structure, and it compares every single assembly in the entire structure and gives them a number. And this process we call numbering, and this is what I want to explain in some detail in this video. So the objects which are numbered in Comosys are basically four, which is all your plates, all your profiles, all the rebars, and all the solids, generic solids, what we call. So if you will go to the object settings, your profiles are numbered, your solids are numbered, your plates are numbered, and your rebars are numbered. Those are the four objects which go through the numbering process. And if you were to look at the variables involved in the numbering process, we have what we call a part prefix and an assembly prefix. And a part prefix basically tells the program that this part is going to get a part number, which is going to start with the prefix of P. And the assembly number tells it that just in case this part ends up being the main member of an assembly, then it's going to get a number, an assembly number starting with KR something. Now, these two numbers are the starting series numbers. All they mean is that, so you'll have lots of beams over here saying assembly would be KR, start number would be 1, but their actual numbers would be different. This is just a starting series. What that will tell the program is that when you start doing the numbering, number these elements starting from 1. So go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like that. But what you can also do, for example, you can, let's say if you have your first floor beams, you can say, okay, all my first floor beams are going to start from 101, and all your second floor beams you can say 201, and all your third floor beams you can say 301. And then what will happen is that the second floor beams will all will start from 201, 202, 203, going to whatever the final beam, whatever the final number of the final beam on the second floor is. And similarly for the first floor and for the other floors. So you can create these series within elements just to tell the program that you want to separate their numbers according to these starting numbers. Now, obviously, you need to be careful, and the program will warn you. For example, if you say for the first floor beams to start from 101, and let's say you've got 130 different beams on the first floor, then they're going to start from 101, 102, but they're going to go all the way to 230 because there are 130 different beams. Now, unfortunately, in that case, the second floor is starting from 201, and then you will have a problem because some of the first floor beams will have the same number as one of the second floor beams. And this is what we call a series overlap. And whenever this happens, Comosys will warn you and it will stop the numbering process and it will ask you to reassign these series numbers. Now, once you've done that, it'll finalize the numbering process, and eventually, once the numbering is finished, you will get part numbers for every single part and assembly numbers for those parts which are the main parts of an assembly. That's the basic idea. Now let me go on to the actual numbering parameters themselves. Now the first concept which I want to talk about is something which we call drawing groups. And normally every Comosys object is created with a drawing group of 0. So if I were to go to the drawings and reports menu, and under it we have this perform numbering, and if I open it and I say perform numbering, if you see, these are the parameters which are involved in numbering, and I'll discuss them one by one, what each of the options means. But at the moment, I want you to focus on this one at the very in the leftmost column, which is the group. And right now, it has gone through the entire structure, and it has checked every single profile, every single plate, every single rebar, every single solid, and all of them have a drawing group of 0. So that's why it has created only one line of numbering. So let me just change that immediately. Let me go and say if I double click on this beam, and if I went into, let me go in and find where the drawing group is. So it's over here. If I were to change the drawing group of that beam to 1, for example, and say apply, okay, or let's do it for a few more. Let's select this one and this one, and also change those to a drawing group of 1. Now, now in the structure, everything else has a drawing group of 0. So if I were to double click on this one, the drawing group is 0. If I were to double click on any one of these plates, the drawing group is would also be, let's find that. Yeah, here it is. The drawing group is 0. So every object has this drawing group variable. But now I've changed the drawing group of 3 of them. And now if I were to go to the perform numbering once again, you will notice that previously there was just one line, but now it has 2 lines. And it's telling me that I went through the model and I found some whatever number of elements with a drawing group of 0. And then I also found some elements with a drawing group of 1. And you can decide to number or not number these individual groups. So you can tell Comosys that, okay, just number those elements which are in group 0 and don't number those which are in group 1. They're going to be numbered separately anyways. This group will not get mixed up with this group. I mean, this group will, what I mean to say by that is that this group is unaware of this group. So what will happen is that it will do the numbering for this group separately and the numbering for this group separately. So you need to be careful when you use this method. That you can use this for separate areas of the structure, for example. And if you're aware of what you're doing, and if you understand exactly what you're doing, what you can also give the same prefixes in different areas, as long as you ensure that the drawings don't get mixed up. But the idea over here is that Comosys will group these drawing groups separately and give you a chance of numbering them with different parameters or not numbering some of them at all. So this is the first thing I wanted to mention, that you have this idea of drawing group, and you can have separate numbering options for these drawing groups. Now let's talk about the actual numbering parameters. So let's go back into that dialog box, and let's say I want to number this group. Now, the first thing, like I said, you can decide whether you want to number or not, right? So you can say, okay, you want to number this particular one. Now, the next option is what we call the unique or not unique. So you have the option of saying unique or not unique, or you can also have the option of a special sort, which is a different one. But what we mean by unique is normally the default is not unique, by the way, and what that tells the program is that when you find two parts to be exactly the same as far as the geometries or whatever variables enter the numbering process, if they're exactly the same, then give them the same mark. So if two plates are exactly the same, and they can both get, say, the mark of P7, right? But sometimes you want to give a number to every part differently. Give a different number to every single part, even if they're the same. And this is quite common practice in concrete structures, for example, where every beam on the floor will be given a different mark. and every column will be given different, although their cross sections and their rebars and everything will be the same. But still, as a way of representation, the way people want to depict these objects in the drawings, they want to give a unique number to every single part, even if they are the same. If that is your case, then you will select the unique option. But otherwise, for example, this is not common in steel structures. So for steel structures, you will prefer to use the not unique option. Now I want to talk about these two columns before I talk about the one before them. And if you notice over here, it says new part and modified part. So the question arises that what is a new part and what is a modified part? Now, the first thing which we need to realize is that in all these 3D modeling programs, we end up doing numbering more than once in a particular structure. So that would be the normal case. You won't just do the numbering once, but you might even end up doing the numbering several times or even dozens of times. So let's say the first time, let's say this is your building and you've finished it or you've come to a certain point, and you do for the first time you do your numbering. Now at that point, all your parts will be new parts as far as the numbering process is concerned. Now let's say the date today is the 1st of June. So on the 1st of June, all parts are new parts, and you number them. And there's certain we talk about the details of what it means over here, but I want to explain what is the meaning of a new part. So when you do the numbering the first time, all parts are new parts. But let's say on the 15th of June, 15 days later, you do a numbering again. Now, between these dates, between the 1st of June and the 15th of June, you might have done two things. You might have added new members. So let's say you had only come to on the 1st of June, you were at this level. And after the 1st of June, you added the final story. So between whatever elements you added between the 1st of June and the 15th of June, they will be called, the next time you do numbering, they will be called new parts. But whatever elements you modified, which were created before the 1st of June, but you modified them after you did the first numbering. So maybe you changed the profile section, or maybe you changed the material, or whatever. You made some modification. Those parts will be called modified parts. So with every numbering, every subsequent numbering, I should say, because in the first numbering, every part is a new part. But after the first numbering, every part is either a modified part or it's a new part. It's a new part if you've added that part after the previous numbering. It's a modified part if you have made some changes to one of the earlier parts. So these two concepts need to be clear. So let's say you're doing a numbering again for the second time, and you have lots of new parts in your structure, and you also have some modified parts. So this column basically tells Comosys what it needs to do with new parts and what it needs to do with the modified parts in the new numbering. So for the modified parts, you have these options. One option is compare to old, which means that since the part has been modified now, it might need to take a new number. So let's say you change the shape of a plate, or you change the shape of a profile. You made a cut or opened a notch or something. So if you choose compare to old, it will mean is that when Comosys is doing the numbering, it should compare it to other existing parts and take their number if with the modification it has started to resemble them. So this is the meaning of compare to old. Similarly, you can take a new number, which means that, okay, I've modified this part, and even if it has started to resemble some other part at this point, I still want you to give it a new number. And this kind of practice is common in the production of shop drawings, because a lot of times you issue certain drawings with certain numbers, and once those drawings have been issued, you don't want to make any revisions to them. You don't want to say that, okay, I had this part called part 7 and there were 7 of those, but now I made some modifications and now there are 13 of those, and this can confuse the shop sometimes. So what you do is, it's common practice in those cases to say, okay, even if it starts to resemble an earlier part, you give it a new number despite that. So you have this option as well for the modified parts, that you can either compare to the old ones and get a number the same as them if there is a resemblance, or even if there is a resemblance, you're forcing the forcing Comosys to give the part a new number. And the third option is keep number if possible. Now, this is the case, for example, let's say you have a part, let's call it P7, and there are 7 of those, or let's say 10 of those. So you have P7 and there are 10 of those in the model. Now, if you go and change 2 of those, 2 out of the 10, so 8 of them still remain in the still retain the earlier geometry, but 2 of them you modify slightly. Now, in that case, when the numbering is done again, those two cannot get the same number P7 as before, because you already have the other remaining 8 P7s. So you'll have 8 P7s which should be different and 2 P7s which should be different. So in those cases, it's impossible for it to keep the same number. So even if you select this option, it will give it a new number. But let's say you actually go and modify all 10 of them. So there were 10 plates called P7, and you made the same changes in all of them. Let's say you added a vertex, or you changed the thickness, or you made any changes. Now, if you change all 10 of them, in that case, their number, which was P7 before, can be maintained even in this new numbering, because the number of pieces is not changing. So if you have chosen this keep number if possible option, in that case, Comosys will give it the same number as the number it had in the last numbering. So this is a very handy option, and this is one of the 3 options you have for your modified parts: compare to old, take a new number, or keep number if possible. Now, similarly for the new parts, and like I said, new parts are those parts which you have entered after the previous numbering. So for the new parts, you have 2 options only. You can either compare them to old parts, and if they resemble some other part, then they can get the same number, or they can take a new number despite their resemblance. So it will depend on your particular project preferences. But if you notice, there is no option of keep number if possible, because it is meaningless anyways. The new parts will not have a number anyway, so there's no point in saying keep number if possible. So the new parts have 2 options: compare to the old ones, or take a new number. And the modified parts have 3 options: compare to an old one, take a new number, or keep number if possible. Now let me explain this column called Renumber All. And the options of which we have over here is either renumber all or only renumber the modified ones. And over here, by modified we mean, so like I said, you can do the numbering process more than once. And sometimes what you also do is you just number, even before you create the drawings, you just do the numbering to see what kind of numbers parts are getting, and maybe you want to create some sample drawings for yourself, even without issuing to the floor for actual manufacturing. And in those cases, when you finally do decide to issue to the shop, you actually want to do a fresh numbering, although you've done several numberings yourself before, but you want to do a clean numbering from scratch. So in those cases, you will select the renumber all option, and this will basically tell Comosys to, although it's done 10 numberings up till that point, but it will just tell it to basically start from the beginning for all the elements, and give a fresh number to all of them. Now, if that is not the case, then you have the option of modified, which will basically tell the program that you keep whatever numbers are existing, and if I've made any changes since the last numbering, either changes or any new members, then only number those, and don't touch the other ones. So these 2 options basically this one will allow you to do a numbering from scratch, which is, like I said, very common as well. Or this will tell you basically to do by default, it is always on modified, because it knows that you will keep on adding to your numbering. So you might issue the drawings for the first floor to the shop, and then you do a numbering again, you issue the drawings for the second floor, and then you do a numbering again, you issue the drawings for the third floor. In those cases, you'll keep this option at modified. Now, this option over here is the reuse of old numbers. And you either have the option of reusing old numbers or not using old numbers. And what this basically means is that as you keep progressing through this numbering business, a lot of empty slots can be created. So let's say you have the P series, and in the model you have P1, P2, P3, P4, P5, P7, whatever, say all the way to P20. But then what you do is you delete some parts. Let's say you delete all the instances of P3 and P8. So now you have a series, you have P1, P2, and then you miss P3 because there's no P3 left in the model. There's P4, P5, P6, P7, but there's no P8 because you deleted all the instances. And there's P9, P10 all the way to P20. And now you enter some new parts. Now, when you enter the new parts, normally, since the last number given was P20, it will start numbering the new parts from P21, P22 and onwards. But if you choose this option of reuse old numbers, what it's going to tell the program is that if there are any empty slots available from the previous positions, then you can use them as well. So you had deleted a P3, which was a different plate or a different profile altogether. But now a new profile or a new plate has been entered. But this new plate can get the number P3 because P3 is an available slot. So this will once again depend on your choice. You can decide to continue from where you've left off, in which case you will say do not reuse, and it will basically continue from P21 onwards. Or you could say reuse any empty slots which might have opened because I've deleted certain members. So once again, this will depend on what you want. So these are the basic parameters of numbering. Let me just repeat that there's the group of the numbering group which you need to keep separate. You can decide to number one group or all groups or whatever. You can decide to give them a unique number even if they are similar. You can renumber from scratch. You can reuse old slots. These are the most important ones. The new parts since the last numbering and the modified parts since the last numbering. And you have various options for them. You can compare them to old. You can make them, force them to take a new number, and similarly for the new parts as well. So this, in a nutshell, is a summary of the numbering algorithm. And all you need to do is then basically just say apply and start numbering, and Comosys will do the numbering of all the parts in the groups mentioned over here. Now, as we said, we can do numbering multiple times, and every time you do a numbering, you will be curious about what actually happened to individual parts and assemblies. Did any numbers change? What became what? And this kind of information is available in the numbering history file. And you can access the numbering history for all the numberings which you've done. So here is one numbering history over here, and it will tell you one by one for parts as well as for assemblies. So right now it's saying that there was one P1 part, and it is still one P1. There were two P2s, and there's still two P2s in the model. There were four P3s, and there's still four P3s. And you can go down. There were 16 P10s, and there's still, so nothing has changed. But there were seven P0s. P0 basically tells you that these are new parts which weren't numbered before. Number of zero basically means it wasn't numbered before. So there's seven parts, and then one of them became P1924, one of them became 1927, two of them became 1939. So it'll give you a detailed history for every single numbering which you do. You can do the numbering 10 times, 20 times, and for both for the parts as well as for the assemblies, it will give you a detailed numbering history. And you can access this command from once again from the perform numbering menu from over here. You just select that, and it'll give you the numbering history of the structure. Now, although the numbering process is automatic, and Comosys will give automatic numbers to all the parts and assemblies. So let's say this one has an automatic number of 1488. But we do have an option with which we can select this member, for example, and go to our numbering and say change the part or assembly number manually. So sometimes you have particular requirements in which you want a particular part to have a particular number for whatever reason. But obviously, this is something which needs to be done extremely carefully, because let's say this was 1488, and if I wanted it to be 1489, for instance, the part number, I can enter this number which I want this part to be and say apply, and Comosys will warn me if there's a problem. So right now it says that this is the ID of this particular beam, but it says there's another ID in the model, and that already has this number. So we can't just arbitrarily assign any number. But if that slot was available, if the slot was empty, and none of the other elements had that number, then it would allow you to basically change the assembly or the part number for that particular part or assembly.